Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second supplemental video for my Silent Hill 3 Let's Play. This one's going to be discussing the quote from Father Vincent about Heather thinking that all of the things she's been fighting in the game look like monsters. I'm going to go over the main theories that I've seen from other people in regards to this, and then kind of give you my idea of what's going on. But first, I think we have to kind of discuss, regardless of whether these monsters are humans that have taken monstrous form, or whether they are just conjurations of some power that's creating the other world. I kind of want to discuss like why are the monsters even there? What are they even trying to do? And there are two different things that I think could be major contenders for these theories. Is the first is that Claudia is the one responsible for it, and the main piece of evidence for this, for Claudia being the one responsible, is towards the end of the game, whenever you go to the Nightmare Church and the church turns into a nightmarish form, and Claudia and Vincent are having their little argument. Vincent mentions that it's Claudia's doing that the church is in the nightmare form that it is.
The power of money that you view with such scorn. Although I admit that this atrocious scenery is all yours.
And this along with a bunch of other pieces of information from the game kind of gives you the idea that Claudia has at least some measure of the power that Alessa does. And because of that, she is able to generate this other world, this transition to the other world, and by extension then, that she is able to generate the monsters that are a part of the other world.
Mine. You hate her too, don't you? You're the only one who can get it done. I don't have powers like you two.
Just from the in-game information, this is certainly a possibility, but there's only one real big flaw with that assumption, and that big flaw is that the monsters are trying to kill Heather. If you let the monster hit you enough, you die. And that happening is extremely contrary to the goals of Claudia and the church in general, because if Heather dies, the god dies, and the god won't be reborn, so their whole plan is kind of thrown out the window. And that's definitely not something they want to happen. So the contrary point to that, that kind of is an explanation for why that is at the end of the day, this is a video game, and there has to be a challenge to the game. If all the monsters were just there to make scary noises and let you walk past them, there would be no challenge. The game would be boring, and no one would play it. So, just from a game design perspective, the monsters have to try to kill you. They just have to. And, that's a reasonable explanation. It's kind of a more, outside of the game explanation, but it's still an explanation and one that makes sense. The other theory, or I guess explanation for it, which is the one I hold to more, is the idea that just like in Silent Hill 1, the other world transitions and the monsters themselves are being created by Alessa, which is, of course, Heather, a part of Heather at least. And this one is kind of backed up by the idea of the fight on the carousel with the memory of Alessa, where after you beat her, there's the whole long diatribe about how she wishes Heather would just die, how she wants Heather to die, so that the god can never be born, and that's the only way that she can see for the god to not be born is if Heather were dead. And with that in mind, it makes perfect sense why the monsters try to kill you and why they're trying to murder you. Because, well, like as I just said, Alessa wants Heather to die. So I guess at the end of the day, it's just more a matter of, I guess, why you think the monsters are trying to kill Heather, I guess. Are they trying to kill her because of in-game reasons, or are they trying to kill her because if they did in the game, from a game design's perspective, would just be bad? Another thing I feel is important to mention because of some of the discussions I was reading on this topic. It's important to keep in mind that Silent Hill 1 and 3, the monsters and what's happening in the other world is different than Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill 1 and 3, the things that are happening are a direct result of the power of the cult's god, and either the power of Alessa or Claudia, whichever one you prefer. Whereas in Silent Hill 2, what was happening was different. It was more the power of the town, kind of undirected and uncontrolled, was affecting things. So in Silent Hill 2, it was true that a person's specific and particular torments were based on their psyche and based on what would torment them and what was their own personal nightmares. And in that case, what was happening was the power was taking what was in the person's mind and making it real. Whereas in Silent Hill 3 and 1, there is a specific person who is channeling their power to create a reality. It's two different things. So you can't just say, oh, well, Heather in Silent Hill 3, when she's in the other world, that's just what she's seeing, and really she's in the real world, and she just thinks she's in the nightmare world. And all of the people... and I think that's important to distinguish, because the first side of the argument, as far as Father Vincent's monsters joke goes, is that part of the justification is to say that, well, the whole thing's subjective anyway. None of that's really happening to Heather, so obviously she's killing people because they're not really monsters. They're just what she perceives as monsters, and she's killing them, and they're just normal people. That's not how Silent Hill 3 operates. That's not how the other world works in Silent Hill 3. That's not what's going on. So I just wanted to get that out of the way right off the bat, because it's not a good way to approach thinking about how the other world and the monsters in Silent Hill 3 operate. So going to get into that, well, I guess I've already gotten into it a little bit. The first side, the monsters are people. Father Vincent was not joking. Heather's been murdering people. I think even if that's true, it's important to distinguish, what I just said. It's not that she looks at them and sees monsters and kills them, but they're actually people. If the monsters are humans, what's happening is the shift to the other world warps them into monstrous forms, and then she's killing them. Whenever the world goes back to normal, they might shapeshift back into normal people, and in that sense, I guess she technically did kill people. However, it's important to note that it's not like, it's not like she's wearing VR gear on her head, and every time she sees a person, she's shooting them, and she thinks they're a monster, but she's really shooting a person. And there's other people around saying, "Oh my God, she just shot somebody." That's not happening. If that were the case, Heather would have never made it past the mall, because she would have had a huge police team on her if she was mass murdering people in the mall. At least that's what I would assume. So that's getting that out of the way. I think the important thing to note in regard to this argument, that every monster in Silent Hill, in the Silent Hill 1 and 3, are people that have been turned into monsters. It's important to note that when Father Vincent tells Heather, like, the whole diatribe about, "Oh, I watched when you murdered them and you were so happy to do it," and all of that stuff.
You're the worst person in this room. You come here and enjoy spilling their blood. And listening to them cry out. You feel excited when you step on them and snuff out their lives.
There's only technically two monsters that you have to kill that he would have been aware of and have seen you do, potentially. The first one is the missionary who killed Harry, and the other one is Leonard. which Father Vincent sent you to go murder. So, when he's saying that, we have to know, I mean, you have to admit, regardless of how you believe, what you believe the monsters are, you have to admit that those two were people in the real world who became monsters and Heather killed them. So, in that case, I mean, what he's saying is accurate. You murdered people. They may have looked like monsters at the time, or not just looked like it, they were monsters at the time. However, she still killed them. And it is perhaps a reference that he is making towards that. It's like, you killed these people, you were happy to do it. Regardless, we'll ignore the fact that they were trying to kill you at the time. That's inconsequential. Self-defense still murder people. No, it's not. So, I mean, from that viewpoint, you can make that argument. You don't have to kill any of the monsters in the game. You can just walk past them. So he couldn't necessarily be talking about any other monster but those two. So there is that point to make. And the main argument I would make, I would not argue with that, but as I said, I would not argue with the idea that those two were people turned into monsters that she killed, because you have to. The rest of the monsters, though, I have a hard time defending that any of those were people. You could maybe make an argument that the slurpers, the guys who crawl on the ground in their underwear, were people turned into monsters, or that the mini versions of the missionaries that you fight in the church. I can't remember what the names are for some reason, but you can make arguments that maybe those were like cultists who got turned into monsters. They were in the church, and when the church turned in the other world, and they got turned into monsters. And even maybe the nurses you can make an argument for, though I'm not as keen to say that those are people turned into monsters. And to kind of expand upon that idea, are we going to say that the giant split worm in Silent Hill 3 was a person, or that the pendulums that fly through the air are people, or that the pterodactyls or the giant lizard with the split face that you fight in Silent Hill 1, or the giant moth in Silent Hill 1, are all of those people too? I don't know. I would argue no. Regardless of what you think, I would say those are just aberrations that are generated by the creation of the other world. But, I mean, you can make a case. If you have a case against that, feel free to say something about it. I would like to hear it. These are just my thoughts on the whole situation. And moving on from that, the second way that I generally see people take Father Vincent's quote is to just kind of believe him, that he was just telling a joke.
Are you talking about the monsters?
Monsters? They looked like monsters to you?
Oh no.
Don't worry. It's just a joke.
He's shown time and time again that he enjoys very much tormenting people. He likes tormenting Claudia. He likes tormenting Heather at various points. He likes being an asshole to just about everybody. And I think he would find nothing funnier than the idea of making Heather feel completely horrified with herself by the idea that maybe the people she's been killing, the monsters that she's been killing, are actually just normal people. And an argument I've heard against believing this idea is that if it was a joke, it's not really funny, and it's not really a joke. However, with that in mind, none of the jokes Father Vincent tells are funny, and none of them are particularly something you would consider a joke. Like, for instance, there's a part earlier in the game where he says a comment of like, "Oh, but it's closer than heaven," and he just starts like laughing his ass off at himself. Like, he thinks it's the funniest thing in the world, but it wasn't funny, and I wouldn't have considered it a joke if he didn't like start laughing about it. But he thought it was really funny.
Go northwest on Nathan Avenue. It's a bit far, but closer than heaven.
So he's got an incredibly strange sense of humor regardless. So the idea that what he said was not a joke because you didn't think it was funny doesn't really hold up, because I don't think any of his jokes are funny. But that does not mean that he did not mean them as jokes. So in that case, it's more likely that outside of the two that you have to kill, all the other monsters in the game are just creations. They just got created, like everything else in the other world. They just got made. And I mean, it's possible. It also makes sense. It also makes perfect sense. I guess my my personal take on it is that when he's given the speech about Heather enjoying murdering them and killing them, and how she's cruel and heartless and all this stuff, I think that he is just, like I said, I think he's just referencing the missionary boss and Leonard, those two, because those are the only guys that he could be referencing, because you don't have to murder anyone else or any other monsters. So in that regard, I mean, he was completely accurate. She was killing people, even if they were turned into monsters. However, his quote about, "Oh, they look like monsters to you," and then laughing about, I think that is just there to be a reference to one of the most influential pieces of media for the Silent Hill franchise as a whole. And I think that's the only reason it's there. It's just to reference that piece of media. Now, what is that piece of media? Well, I'll talk about that next time.